Welcome to Every Voice, Every Vote. Lessons on collaborative elections coverage from Philadelphia. Please welcome to the stage, Ethan Holland.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to introduce the panel for today. We're going to have Ariella Cohen with the Philadelphia Inquirer. We have Will Gonzalez from Seba. We have Mel Lee from the Uri Center, Ashanti Martin from Word Radio, and our moderator today is Sean Mooring from the Lenfest Institute for Journalism.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for that introduction, and really glad to be here this morning with all of you. You see, we've already been introduced. I really want to talk a little bit about this great initiative that we have been a part of called the Every Voice, Every Vote initiative. And Every Voice, Every Vote is a citywide coalition of more than 80 organizations, community groups, and media organizations collectively under the same driving belief that when Philadelphians from all communities are civically engaged, when the local media provides sustained focus on the issues that communities say are important, and when those decisions are based on people and not politics, faith and democracy can begin to be restored. Why now for this initiative? And one of the things is this was one of the most competitive primary elections in this city's history, with over 12 candidates on the Democratic side. And in November, we'll continue this process and elect Philadelphia's 100th mayor. We set to break out of the habit through this initiative of a traditional horse race election and move and really try to focus on the issues and that matter most to residents, and particularly at this pivotal time in our city's history. And so our role, the role of Lenfest Institute in this effort, really was focused on management, because we're not a newsroom, but that our role in this was really to provide grant funding, convene communities, and synthesize best practices to support sustainable challenges facing local news providers. And supporting the Philadelphia news ecosystem is core to the work that we do in the primary work that I'm focused on at the Institute, and Every Voice, Every Vote fit specifically within that portfolio. It's important to note again that what we do and what we didn't do, our role was not to serve as a newsroom, but we engaged partners who played that role, but then also, and most importantly, we also engaged community in a way that the foundation had not, or the Institute has not done in the past. And we were able to both find creative collaborations and I think authentic collaborations. They weren't forced collaborations, but really looking for how do we engage people to come together to work on these issues. And then the Institute provided financial support for the project although the majority of our funding, we did provide some financial support. The majority came from the William Penn Foundation, who's one of our philanthropic leaders here in Philadelphia, as well as the Knight Lenfest Fund, the Knight Foundation Philadelphia, Comcast, and a number of individual donors. In terms of how Every Voice, Every Vote is structured, we are taking a holistic approach to this effort that comes through every step and creates feedback loops that for our four primary components, and those being community engagement and events, community listening and research, high impact reporting and community information, and then also community citywide messaging effort. Through our research, we engaged with Temple University's survey research and also a market research firm called SSRS and the Pew Charitable Trust to carry out a comprehensive public opinion research survey. And we actually have another survey that is being administered right now by one of our partners at the Urban Affairs Coalition that's a follow-up to this effort. And then in the fall of 2022, we conducted 6 focus groups that informed the survey that we issued, and those focus groups engaged 58 voting age residents representing 26 zip codes across the city, and used those qualitative findings that informed our public opinion poll that reached over 1,200 Philadelphia residents. And the data shared reflected or shed light on if residents think that Philadelphia is headed in the right direction, what voting behavior exists now, and then also identify the top priorities for the next administration, which came back as crime, education, the economy, jobs, and affordable housing, and also the opioid use in that order. And then as perhaps the most interesting and useful aspect of the research was a comparison in terms of the data based on demographics such as race, gender, age, as well as crime and education at the neighborhood level and folks with other identities. Our media partners also dug deep into the data, which Ariella will share a little bit more about later, looking at the similarities and differences in responses based on what we found. In terms of the coalition, at the heart of the initiative was our partners. We issued over 63 grants and $1.5 million to 63 partners in 26 media organizations. We also put out an open call for proposals to both media organizations and community-centered nonprofits, which then led to the grant making that I just mentioned. In total, they produced and will produce, as we're still going until the end of November, more than 70 public forums, 20 voter guides, and some that were focused on communities, including immigrants, returning citizens, specific neighborhoods, and some focused on specific topics. These projects collectively reached every neighborhood in the city to engage the top 13 most spoken languages in the region, and also served racial, ethnic, and affinity communities that represented the full diversity of Philadelphia. And we also prioritized certain neighborhoods based on their histories of marginalization and based on lower voter turnout rates. We engaged in citywide messaging using a component. We ran PSAs on the subways and on billboards throughout the city with our public transportation, as well as our partners that gave on air and on radio and in their newspapers. And the last approach was also actively engaging a network of trusted messengers. We worked with an organization called ZOMAD that engaged 59 Philadelphia-based social media creators that communicated directly with the election, around the election, most primarily using Instagram. And through them, they shared their personal motivations on why folks should be voting or what their interests were, and we did that through 3 coordinated pulses in March, April, and May. And collectively, those messengers published 284 social media posts, generated 15,000 engagements, and reached more than 740,000 Philadelphians over the age of 18, which represents 60% of the potential voters in this city. And so now I'm going to share the mic with some of our partners to get a little bit closer into their activities.
Hello. Thank you, Sean. So that was a great overview of the project that we were so excited to be part of. Let me figure out this thing. Boop. So, as the Philadelphia region's legacy newspaper, we looked at this as an opportunity to rethink how we've done political coverage. As Sean said, this was a really high-stakes election for Philadelphia. Philadelphia is overwhelmingly Democratic with 7-1 voter registration advantage for Democrats. So the primary was, in essence, the election. There were 770,000 eligible voters. And in the past, I think, probably the political coverage that we've done has reached a small segment of top-line voters, the people who are already super engaged. And those people tend to be our subscribers. So we thought this was a great opportunity to meet the challenge of meeting voters where they are and thinking differently about an approach that centered voters' priorities rather than, as Sean said, the horse race or the kind of news march of press conferences, polls that are centering candidates, and more responsive coverage that I think generally describes a lot of political coverage in our country. So we did 9 stories, and we worked with 7 desks across the newsroom, which is significant. In the past, coverage of election has largely lived with the politics desk, which is a relatively small desk within our newsroom. Here we had a chance to work with folks on the health desk, on the business desk, on the justice and injustice desk, and perhaps most importantly, on the community's engagement desk, which is a new desk for the Inquirer that's focusing on communities that have long been marginalized and underserved by community. So we were taking the political coverage outside of our political framework and really democratizing it across our newsroom. So all the reporters who had expertise at different beat levels had an opportunity to reframe the race along the sort of interests of the constituencies they cover and serve. And as Sean said, the data itself was a really key part of what we did. So there were really radical divergences along community lines in the responses to the Lenfest poll. We saw that overwhelmingly, unfortunately, Philadelphians don't feel that the city is moving in the right direction, but communities of color were far more likely to believe that the city was headed in the wrong direction. Low-income people had a much more negative view of the city than people with higher incomes. There were loads of kind of revealing findings once we disaggregated. So we were partnering very closely with our data team on that. And then that allowed for us to really dig in on those 9 stories and approach, again, the political coverage with a view to what issues matter to voters and how that might show up and shape the election. So at the screen that you're looking at right now, you see 3 illustrations. We did actually also partner with great illustrators on this within our newsroom. And you see on that bottom left corner that opioid issue image. So opioid use is clearly a hot political topic. If anyone was listening to the Republican primary debate last night, you would have heard Vivek Ramaswamy name drop Kensington as a kind of watchword for a war zone in America. So Kensington, which is a community that has been disproportionately harmed by opioids because of a history of containment and various systemic factors in that community, has been really at the center of political debate in our city for a long time, but we haven't done as much reporting on it in a political context as perhaps we should. So, we did a story that looked at how people in various communities, what they wanted to see out of the next mayor, out of their response to the opioid crisis, and talked to people within that community who were most affected by it about what they wanted to see from a mayoral candidate. So that's an important departure, again, from a traditional mayoral coverage. And then you see that image of a police officer behind police tape. So Philadelphia right now is in the midst of a major gun violence crisis. It's reaching record proportions, really heartbreaking every day. We really dug in about what people see as the solutions that Philadelphians, the solutions that Philadelphians want the next mayor to try using the poll data. And, you know, it's pretty interesting, some of the findings. Philadelphians, by and large, actually do want to see more police in their community, but the way that they want to treat the crimes is perhaps differently than police have done in the past, and that was revealed in the poll, and so we were able to illuminate that through our coverage. And then as Sean said, with housing affordability, you see that slide of housing. Again, that's an issue that is in a lot of our coverage, but not always so closely aligned to electoral coverage. And so we were able to bring that into the frame for readers and audiences. And then I think one real achievement was our voter guide, which was informed by the findings of the Every Vote poll, where we understood that voters are dissatisfied, they're not as engaged as we would like, and we had to, again, meet them where they were. So we actually modeled it after the Ringer's quarterback rankings, which give you different ways to toggle into the information. Do you want a lot of information about a quarterback or just a little? Do you want to know everything about their history or just like a taste? And so we gave people a really accessible, mobile-friendly format to learn about the candidates. And we found that people really responded and said on social media that it was the most useful voter guide ever. And we saw a lot of engagement of that was shared through the Every Voice, Every Vote program. And so I think as a whole, kind of this experience really helped us think about how to move political coverage out of the province of one small desk and really share it across the newsroom, and thinking more about sort of how to take voter perspectives into all of our coverage. And then again, it just really underscored the importance for me of poll disaggregation and disaggregation as a tool to really understand the communities that we're covering. And I think that is all I really have to say here, so thank you.
Great. Just click to the next. No, advance the slide to the next.
There we go. Buenas tardes. My name is Will Gonzalez. I'm the executive director of SEBA, a coalition building organization in the Latino community of Philadelphia. We're very honored that we're part of Every Voice, Every Vote, another collective impact initiative that really allows communities like the Spanish-speaking Latino community of Philadelphia to amplify what it wants to do in terms of ensuring that there is civic engagement by our community, voter engagement by our community. We are a growing community, but for the Latino community and the immigrant community in Philadelphia, Philadelphia would not have continued to grow in terms of its population. We're seeing that also across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Spanish speakers are the largest limited English proficient population in the city. So it's very important that we try to communicate in what I consider three languages: English, Spanish, and Spanglish. We're threatened by misinformation and disinformation. We have a budding, growing group of Spanish-speaking media. And then we're seeking to improve how we engage our nonprofit ecosystem, which is the backbone of the community, and youth. We're seeing a great number of Latinos in terms of the growth. So nationally, they're saying that there's every year 800,000 Latinos turn 18. That's in the nation. In the Commonwealth, 21,000 Latinos turn 18 every year. And in Philadelphia, 4,500 Latinos turn 18 every year. So engaging youth, using art for social change, and obviously advocating for more access. Pennsylvania has some of the most antiquated voting laws in the country, and continuing that collective action. Language access and voting, we're blessed to have Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. Helping people through the media understand that and use it, and amplifying its potential impact to help people come out and vote in their language. So that is very, very important. We're part of the Ve Vota hotline. It's a nonpartisan, comprehensive civic participation platform, which aims not only to remove barriers by providing information about voting, but also to address any concerns that people may have and report any problems. And again, being part of Every Voice, Every Vote, we're able to share that information widely, more widely, and deeper. Language access is more than just English and Spanish, and so the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law has this huge platform with various languages to provide information about voting and to report any problems about voting. Although Philadelphia is covered by Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which requires that everything be in English, Spanish, and the Chinese languages, and that's based on some population thresholds that was in a previous slide. We were able to advocate during this period of time to also have the city of Philadelphia add additional languages. So we're looking forward to 2024, more than just the 3 languages that I mentioned that are required by Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which are English, Spanish, and the Chinese languages. We hope that another 3 additional languages will be added. And again, sharing and talking about this, amplified, magnified our advocacy around this, and we're seeing some progress. Addressing misinformation and disinformation is also very big. I mean, I'm sure you guys are talking about it here, but imagine addressing it also in Spanish. And you can see through this graph how the Spanish language misinformation and disinformation can have an adverse impact on how people, Spanish speakers, I'll focus on that, can use that faulty information to make decisions. And the challenge is that we have in monitoring it and following up on it. NALEO, National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, is also very active with that. And there's a program called Defienda la Verdad, Defend the Truth, which seeks to monitor what's going on, report it, and address it. Obviously, we don't want to amplify it, but we want to inoculate people if we see some things that don't add up or that are not true. And so Every Voice, Every Vote also helped us gather volunteers to do monitoring of social media to identify misinformation and disinformation. The media collaborations within the Spanish language ecosystem, media ecosystem, also helped us a lot. Every Voice helped us a lot to, in one point of contact, engage with these various media from our community, and specifically Telemundo, Impacto, and the Kensington Voice. We needed to, as we are communicating with our community, we also are seeking to enhance the voter literacy of the community. You know, what is a naked ballot? What is the electoral college? You know, various things that can be stated in one word or two, but if you don't have the ability to understand those terms, then you're going to be limited in terms of addressing things, understanding the coverage. So we're making a concerted effort to try to make sure that we increase the voter literacy of our community, especially our youth. And then using arts for social change, bringing in, you know, music and other things to enhance the participation of people, because just telling folks, hey, go to vote is not enough. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We want to increase engagement in folks. We know that the media plays an important tool, and so we're very, very blessed to have Every Voice, Every Vote helping us along with our efforts to encourage our community to come out and participate. We're looking forward to 2024. Democracy is in peril, right? And it's not just a presidential election. Pennsylvania will be an important state. There's a Senate seat at stake. And also there's the local elections. We haven't talked about, the House of, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and the Pennsylvania Senate, which also there's a lot of important things going on. So looking forward to continuing the work, especially if we have a new mayor and a new city council. City Council of Philadelphia, I think it was 5 or 6 folks who left City Council. And so it's going to be very interesting. So looking forward to working with all of you on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashanti Martin, and I am the General Manager of WURD Radio, Word Radio. Just for some context, we are the only independently owned Black talk radio station in Philadelphia and one of only 4 currently in the country. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year, and over the past 2 decades, we have built up a relationship we have a very high degree of credibility with our audience for bringing them information that is highly relevant to the interests of Black Philadelphians, which Black people in Philadelphia make up about 45% of the population of the city. So this is a highly engaged voter base, our listeners. A really pivotal population, not only in this local election, but nationally as well, as we saw in 2020 and will continue to be in 2024, as Will explained. So our participation in Every Voice, Every Vote really yielded an unprecedented level of collaboration with media organizations across Philadelphia. And this was a really positive outcome for us because, even if we had sought to form this number of collaborations, it would have taken a lot more energy, a lot more resources and time on our staff, which is small. We're a small radio station, and we do a lot. So this really provided an infrastructure for us to be able to quickly connect with different media organizations who were planning forums and executing coverage on a really wide variety of topics. We were able to identify which organizations were convening forums on topics of relevance to our audience. So this is a list of some of the partners that we executed forums with and collaborated on different types of coverage. And I would say that one of the best outcomes is that, this work has resulted in relationships that have already, and I believe will go, beyond the work of this coalition. So I think that's really a net positive for the residents of Philadelphia, because through this work we were able to amplify the work of other media organizations and also really cross audiences, expose our audience to new journalists and new types of coverage, and also be able to amplify the work of other media organizations. One of the things I think is really notable about the forums, there were, I think, 70?
Over about 30 forums. 30, 40 forums.
There were a lot. And we broadcast many of those. And I think a real benefit is that these forums take a lot of work. They're very, it's a lot of resources to execute. And I would say the forums that I attended had a really great turnout, but what Word was able to do was to maximize the reach. So you might have a forum that had 100 or 200 people, but because we were there to broadcast these forums, we're able to reach thousands more people. And I think that had a really important impact. I would say that the difference in coverage was that we were able to really dive deep into a lot of different topics. So even just Word alone, we broadcast and organized forums that, touched a lot of different issues, but there were many forums that focused on one issue. So Word alone, we were able to bring to our listeners really deep dives on topics including the environment, arts and culture, technology and city policy, and the relationship between the city and media organizations. So this was really incredibly important because there were, as Sean said, 12 candidates. Every forum had, at least 8 candidates on stage. So you can imagine how difficult it is when, I didn't have a chance to watch the debate yesterday, but I'm looking forward to catching up. But, that frustration when you're not really able to dive deep into topics that really matter to people. So this allowed us to do that. Funny enough, I was speaking yesterday with someone who worked for one of the campaigns, and they were very frustrated with the project because there were so many forums and it required the candidates to be so many different places at one time. And one of the remarks that I thought was funny and illuminating is that, some of the candidates felt that, everyone has a forum. There's a forum for everything. The bike people, they had like 3 forums, and you have a forum run by, a one-legged guy on a bicycle, and it was just too much. I personally would argue that that's a net positive for Philadelphians. I think that the one-legged guy on a bicycle does deserve to have a voice and a more direct line to the people who are, vying to represent the city. So I just think it was a net positive for democracy. Another thing that I've heard from the candidates is that it took away from their time to be, kind of out in the community, stumping through neighborhoods. And, I have thought about that because that is a valuable part of any political campaign. But I think that one of the strengths with this, with how Every Voice, Every Vote organized all of the activities was residents could go onto the website and see what events were happening and go find the candidates themselves. So I think that's a really strong way of engaging people and giving them the choice to meet candidates out when and where they're available, rather than relying on candidates determining where do I need to be to, strategically make the right appearance or turn out the, specific votes that I need to get an edge. Another really positive for us as a radio station, even though this is a local election and the FCC laws apply federal and state, but we really do try to adhere to that for all of our election coverage, just out of duty to our listeners. And so with so many candidates, you can imagine the logistics involved in ensuring that we granted equal time to all the candidates. So the forums really made it very, took a lot of that pressure off, ensuring that we granted them all an equal time, equal platform, and that they were all able to be heard by our listeners. And another aspect that I think was different from 8 years ago, which was our last major mayoral election where we elected a new mayor, Jim Kenney, is that we were able to engage our listeners in a structured format where we had segments where we asked our listeners, okay, what questions do you have for the candidates? And that we were able to take those and really go by issue and have a writer go out and see, based on through interviews, research, websites, collect that information and publish it on our website in one place so that people really felt like we played a part in being able to answer voter questions directly. And as a result of that, not only did we have the written work that we did, but we were able to really compile a very extensive library of audio and video coverage on a website, on a landing page that served as something of a voter guide. One of the things that we also were able to do, because we realized how important this volume of information was then to go back and look at all of our past interviews of the candidates and make them available for people so that they could listen to what the candidates were saying 5-10 years ago even, and evaluate the statements that they were making on the campaign trail, and maybe see evolutions that the candidates have made to really factor into making those decisions. I think also one of the major strengths of being part of this Every Voice, Every Vote campaign was just the ability to brand our coverage and really make it resonate, as Sean said, being able to promote our coverage digitally in a way that resonated visually, even with things that you're seeing around the city on bus shelters and subways and buses. I think made it stick in people's imaginations and memories. So, overall, I think that as a radio station, we're radio first, audio first, but it allowed us to collaborate with media across the spectrum of content and delivery methods, and absolutely, I think will benefit Philadelphians in our coverage beyond this election and even beyond election coverage. So.
Hi, my name is Mel Lee. I'm with Ori Center. I'd like to thank you, all the audience today, and also ONA 2023 and EVP for this opportunity to share about Ori Center's work with EVP. Ori Center is a small grassroots organization with a mission to organize Korean and Asian Americans toward social, racial, and economic justice. For this mission, we are building our community power, running programs in 5 key areas, including civic engagement, immigrant justice, youth leadership, community services, and arts and culture. Since our establishment in the late 2018, our civic engagement programs have increased Korean and Asian Americans voters' civic participation through voter registration, voter turnout, and voter education efforts in Greater Philadelphia and beyond. Through the partnership with Every Voice, Every Vote this year, however, our voter engagement efforts, we focused our voter engagement efforts around the mayoral election, with 2 Korean American candidates running for the election this year. The local Korean American showed much more interest, or it drew more attention to the mayoral election this year. However, many of our community members, especially those who are naturalized citizens with limited English proficiency, did not have much access to information, to a lot of the, unfortunately, great election coverage, or even to basic civic education or civic information. So while the local Korean ethnic media mostly covered the 2 former Korean American city council members' candidacy, Uri Center's civic engagement team provided basic civic information via paid ads. And we also had a call, We also had a call and in-person conversations with voters at different venues, including Asian grocery stores, senior daycare centers, and senior apartment complex, as well as on the college campuses, based on the reports, election reports that were brought up or shared at the EV space. Okay, and then, yeah, mostly our canvassers, as you can see in the photo, would participate in candidates forums and also, had a conversation with the voters about basically talking about the issues that our voters are most concerned of, including public safety or housing and education. 우리 center also provided language support at 2 polling locations with the largest number of Korean speaking monolingual voters in Philadelphia on the election day as well. You can see the 2 images of paid ad placed on Ethnic media during this primary election. The left one carries information on voter registration, including eligibility, since a lot of our senior or naturalized citizens, voters, a lot of them say that, okay, I didn't even know that I had to register to vote in this country. So this is the level of conversation that sometimes we need to have with our community members. And on the right, you can see the paid ads that contains information about the Pennsylvania's closed primary election and vote by mail. This is a photo from our door knocking session at a senior apartment complex. Helen Lee, a Korean American senior, you can see on the right, said that there are so many senior citizens in this area who do not know about their voting rights and do not receive any information about elections, especially in Korean. We really need the kind of help that Uri Center provides, like in the fields, like the direct conversations that we can have. Again and again, each year we come across, of course, there are different level of conversations that we have with voters. However, every year we come across at least a few senior voters who say that, like, I've been living in this country for 5 decades, 4 decades, but this is the first time that I talk about the election in Korean. Or this is the first time that I actually get to vote because, I could not vote because of the language barrier, but now, thankfully, I can learn more about the election and participate in this country's democracy. So Asian Americans are the fastest growing ethnic or racial group in the United States and in Pennsylvania. And we are heavily targeted by the right with misinformation and disinformation. We have seen this in the case of the distrust in the mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania, and also, the 2020 election result. And in the case of the affirmative action, which wedge agents actually against other marginalized communities. And for solidarity and progress, we do believe that we need collaboration, which includes ensuring that our digital and news media are able to appropriately reach and connect with our communities in the languages audience are most comfortable with, and also understanding the cultural nuances. Collaboration between media and community organizations that are trusted messengers within the community also can ensure reporters are getting the facts and then centering on those directly impacted. And as in the case with the partnership with EBEP, we could really advocate our community's voting rights. And we could neutralize or push back the misinformation and disinformation by making information more accessible to our community members. For the 2023 general election now and beyond, Uri Center still will continue to provide language support to our community members through voter engagement works. And we have seen the necessity So planning to provide Korean translations of election articles and resources that appear in EBV partner media as well. This is the first year that Uri Center joined the EBB initiative, and I hope that we can continue to further identify the needs of our community and the collaboration, and build structure or partnership for long-term sustainability, not only along with the community organizations or EBB media partners, but also for Uri Center to build a better, stronger relationship with local ethnic media so that we can channel the information that we gather or we are shared with at this EBB partnership space to with the ethnic media, and thus better with our community members. And we hope that this is the way that we can advocate again for our Korean and Asian American communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just want to touch really briefly on what's next so that we can get to some of your questions. And that was that in terms of where we go now that we've gotten through the primary, we're preparing for the general election, and we'll be engaging with additional forums and get out the vote activities, continuing with the voter guides, again, because we still have very active in terms of judicial elections that are part of what's coming forward, as well as city council. And then also planning for a post-election accountability initiative or civic engagement initiative that will continue to engage our existing coalition and potentially build upon that, and look at what does it mean to engage with both our media and community partners around civic education and civic engagement going forward, and potentially serving as a model for other cities. Some key takeaways include, the multifaceted projects require an infrastructure and coordination that we've been able to provide. The community-centered model created natural feedback loops, and some of which we heard about today, and then grounding the reporting in the research framed a really important and engaged public discourse, as well as the coordinated and consistent branding of the campaign allowed it to really permeate in every community. And so with that, we will wrap up and take any questions.
Okay, at this point, we don't have any online questions, but we have plenty of people in the audience. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and I will come over. When I get to you, please say your first and last name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Emily Lytle. I'm with the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I was curious, I know a big part of Every Voice, Every Vote is language access. And I've heard from a lot of newsrooms, they want to improve language access of their coverage, but they're not exactly sure where to start or what that looks like, whether it's translating more articles or creating coverage that is specifically for that audience and then writing it in that language. Do you all have any advice for newsrooms who want to improve language access of their coverage and figuring out where to start or what tools to look at or what strategies to look at?
So we're blessed that the Inquirer has taken some moves in terms of providing some of their stories in Spanish. We also see a very strong relationship between NBC and Telemundo here. If you notice the gentleman, his shirt not only says NBC, but also says Telemundo, and the helicopter as well has Telemundo. And so an effort is being made. I know that, it's easy for me to say because Spanish is the largest limited English proficient population Spanish speakers here in this country. I think it's a bigger challenge when you talk about other languages, and I'll defer to Mel on that. But I think this here allowed even community-based media to to be fortified. So, for example, one of the newspapers, Impacto, in this 21st century is still doing, it's a weekly, printing door-to-door delivery of some of the newspapers that they, of some of the editions that they do. I think twice a month they'll print an edition and deliver it. So I think it's just engagement with the community as well, and see what, with that particular community, what they want more of. But we're seeing here in Philadelphia, at least in the Spanish language, and a growth of the community within, right, to deliver the messages, and then some of the bigger media players reaching out to our community. But I'll defer to Mel.
Yeah, I can, something that comes to my mind is that what Uri Center tried with the pandemic period. During the pandemic period, many of our non-English speaking community members were left out of the local vaccination information, because at the beginning, you know, there were a lot of information about where to get your vaccination, etc. But at like our Korean analyst, I'm speaking only about, I can only speak about the Korean American community ethnic media. Those media could translate some of the national news, but not the local ones. So what we did was that we actually, with our limited capacity, of course, we could not translate every coverage on the vaccination, but still we tried to provide the summarized translation of these information and send them out through KakaoTalk, which is a lot of Korean-speaking community members use. It's a messenger app, and as well as, you know, through our social media. And I was thinking, we were thinking about, you know, sharing the amazing news coverages that we had access, because we could speak English, to translate them into Korean, or at least give a summaries of them to our community members. But unfortunately, yeah, with our limited capacity, we are not able to do the work during the primary election. And this is what we are right now trying to solve, or like come up with either, recruiting more volunteers to translate, or like, you know, just better prepare, or better prepare our canvassers to have this conversation with our voters when we talk to them in the field. Right now, we are basically with our Korean-speaking seniors, especially, just you know, show them, for example, an article in Inquirer, but you know, the seniors can read the Google translated version, and sometimes they cannot, they're not quite culturally competent. So that is kind of an issue, but hopefully in the future at EBEV, or larger media or institutes can also put some efforts for this matter.
Yeah, and it's also an area that we're looking into as the coordinator of this effort, and be able to provide some resource around translation, even if it's coordinating among, you know, our 80 plus members, to see where we can assist, or potentially provide some resources for translation.
Yeah, I was just going to speak about the Inquirer's effort. I think those resources, that would be great. That was something we struggled with and talked about a lot. You know I work most closely with the news desk, and for the election, obviously, we were really concerned about translation and thought a lot about it, but we had the help of the Every Voice, Every Vote coalition to think about, well, they are reaching communities, and we have these community partners. But, you know, just this week, we have been covering a police shooting where police killed a Spanish-speaking young man, Eddie Irizarry, and we've been covering this case closely. our reporters, we have a Spanish language reporter in the field, and he's done some excellent reporting with the Irizarry family and in the community. He's at the funeral right now. But we can't ask, Rodrigo speaks Spanish, but it would be unfair to ask him to both write a story in English and in Spanish. And, the time does not allow that. And so we've been thinking a lot about how to bring translation into our breaking news process, which is a difficult and resource-intensive ask. But these are the kinds of questions I do think newsrooms need to be asking.
Okay, we have another question to the panel's left here. If you could say your name and where you're from.
Hi, Jennifer Tanaka with WBEZ in Chicago. What you've done here is really impressive. My question is about the survey that you conducted with the community, and I'm just curious to know what was the most surprising insights from it, and then also how did that feedback from the community or input substantially change some aspect of the coverage, either in framing or specific assignments?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think that the research was really a game changer in this effort, in that we were able to really look at and differentiate, the feedback by community, kind of racial, ethnic background, breakdown, looked at, how folks responded to questions around business development or income, in real estate development by income level, and being able to really dig into the information. I thought that with some of those different responses and differentiating responses were some of the most interesting findings. And it was, we were able to provide kind of the broad aspects of the survey data to all of our media partners that were able to unpack it. We saw where the questions were used by Fox 29 to kind of headline their debate sections, and really asking questions based on that feedback. The Inquirer did a lot of very in-depth reporting on the data, breaking it down, as well as for some of our ads and the way in which we engaged with a lot of our other media partners that really was able to utilize that and really, in my mind, I think really shifted the focus again from the focus on the candidates to what are some of the issues. And in that survey also spoke to some of the potential solutions, and really be able to kind of guide that conversation and lead it in that direction. But I'll also open it up.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the most value that I found was the disaggregation and being able to see the divergences in public opinion along racial, gender, income lines, even neighborhood lines. And I can point to one specific example. Illegal dumping and trash in general is a big problem, a big quality of life issue with environmental health implications. And Philadelphia's communities of color are disproportionately harmed. A lot of the illegal dumping sites are in areas in the city like Kensington, where there's just been a history of disinvestment for a long, long time. And you could see in the Every Voice, Every Vote data set that people of color, and particularly people in specific zip codes, really ranked illegal dumping as a high priority issue in the municipal election. And so then we did a story, and we had 2 reporters go to some of the areas that we know, according to city data, are disproportionately harmed by illegal dumping, talk to people on the ground about what they're doing to combat the issue on a grassroots level and what they wanted from elected officials. And the story, while it was not one of our most popular stories of the election season, it did really resonate, and it got considerable traffic. And we cover illegal dumping, obviously, a lot as a newsroom, but we had never covered it quite in that way, in that political context with that framing. And I think there was a lot of power in the data that we had, and then our ability to go out on the ground and do that reporting. So, I mean, does that kind of answer your question about how we used it? Yes.
If the panelist is wrapped with that question, we have time for one more. Any other comments on that question from the panel? Okie doke.
Hi, I'm Sarah with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette in Little Rock. I was just wondering if you had any tips or how you navigated or made a case for partnering with other media that's maybe been viewed as competitors or we've had contentious relationships with, I'll say that much.
I mean, it was really interesting. So, in addition to the 63 funded partners, folks who we gave grants to, we had over 20 additional pro bono partners, and each of our major television stations were also a part of the initiative. And so it was great because what we did not force any relationships or collaborations. We put out the whatever news organization or community organization is hosting this forum, and they made organic, connections within the coalition. We'll cover it, we'll pick it up. So where we had competitors, we're actually working collectively together and, able to really build on those relationships. And it also existed where there may have been pre-existing relationships with some of the community groups and also some of the major media partners. We also had where Word Radio may be covering it and 6ABC is covering it. So we had a lot of collaboration among the partners, and we didn't really deal with a lot of, or have to deal with a lot of, kind of the competitiveness.
I just want to add something really quick. We have a trusted backbone, a trusted convener on an important issue that transcends, differences, which is democracy and voting. And so I think that was the key factor and is the main ingredient of any successful collaborative effort.
Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you spending the time with us.